Okay, so here we go. So today we welcome Dr. Alan Berger. He's going to continue our look at the emotional sobriety in 12 steps. Alan's going to take another in-depth look, especially at step 4 and overcoming the barriers to emotional freedom and self-recovery.
Okay. Well, as those of you that have been with us for a while know that what we're doing is that Herb and I are alternating, and then when I'm available, I join Herb with kind of a summary of the step. And tonight, since Herb is not available, I'm going to go ahead and summarize what I think is happening in step 4. But once again, I think it's very important as we go through this that we look at what creates the resistance, right? What creates resistance to our being able to thoroughly have a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is the impact that self-hate and self-alienation has on our effectiveness in being able to do step 4. So that's the goal for today. But let's start by just once again reminding you that it's important to accept the idea that the explicit goal of working the 12 steps is to discover and achieve a practice of emotional sobriety. Bill clearly stated this in the 12 and 12 when he said, here we begin to practice all 12 steps of the program in our daily lives so that we and those about us may find emotional sobriety. You see, there's an interesting thing that happens, and we talk about it all the time in terms of if you don't transform it, you transmit it, right? We're talking about that anxiety, sickness tends to be contagious, right? And those people around us oftentimes end up as sick, if not sicker than we are in terms of what happens. It's like what happens is the relationship drops down to the lowest common denominator. Well, the reverse is true, and that's good news in one regard, is that as you begin to become healthier, more mature, more differentiated, then the people around you cannot continue to do the old dance step that they've been doing with you. It requires that people change in how they relate to us. So that's why Bill said, and this was very, very insightful on his part, many family therapists in the 50s and 60s started to talk about this, is once you change one aspect of a system, the whole system begins to change. I saw many times when I was working at the treatment center, which I probably put in over 30 years working in various different treatment programs. But one of the things we'd see is that when someone would start recovery, instead of it being a joyful and cause for celebration, there would also be a tremendous amount of anxiety that took place as the family was adjusting to recovery. And that the adjustment to recovery was incredibly stressful in its own right. I can't tell you how many spouses of the alcoholic said, well, God, if she sobers up or he sobers up, they may not want to be with me anymore. You see, we got together when they were drinking, and I don't know if they're going to like me or not. And so all of these issues start to surface. And that's why Bill had so much insight into saying that we and those about us may find emotional sobriety. Because once we transform it, we also transmit it, right? If we don't transform it, we transmit it. But once we transform it, we also transmit it, and we transmit our health. Ernie Larson talked about stage 2 recovery, and this is, I think, synonymous with emotional sobriety, is that he calls it dealing with the mountain of living is what stage 2 recovery is all about. It's about getting on with life by facing those patterns, habits, and attitudes that control your life, and which, for perhaps the first time in your life, you're clear-headed, sober, or emotionally sound enough to face. That's what emotional sobriety is all about. It's about increasing our awareness of those patterns and habits and attitudes that diminish our life, that sabotage the kind of life that we'd really like to live. And that begins with step 4, is becoming aware of these patterns. It's the first time we're really sitting down and facing ourselves and taking a look at ourselves. So what we're really affecting is when we create emotional sobriety is we're really creating a consciousness of emotional freedom. It's a consciousness that moves us away from an I'm okay if way of living, meaning that I'm dependent on what happens to me to be okay, to a consciousness that says I'm okay even if things don't turn out the way that I want them to. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to get okay just like that. You know, those of you that know what's been going on for me, it's taken a year and a half before I'm really starting to get my feet back under me and find some sense of balance or semblance of balance in my life. But if we persist, if we hang in there, if we're tenacious, we will find that path. As my sponsor's friend Tom Catton, my sponsor is Tom McCall, but the Tom Catton recently passed away, but it was he and I got clean and sober together. He said, you know, recovery sometimes is about not drinking or using when it would make much more sense to drink or use. It's not drinking or using when it would make much more sense to drink or use. So let's look at this, what I've talked about is the relationship between the steps. And I suggest that you think of it in terms of kind of an energy. So step 1 creates a certain kind of an emotional charge. What it says is that it says I'm powerless, right? That I admit that I'm powerless over alcohol, which means I'm powerless over my alcoholism or my disease, and that my life, that I've made my life unmanageable. So this means I've made a mess of things. And by the way, since I'm powerless, I have no idea on how to fix it, given the kind of consciousness I currently have. You know, you've heard many times before, Herb, and I say things like the quote Einstein that says that you can't solve a problem with the consciousness that's creating it. Well, that can't be any truer than what is happening as we come to our admission and our awareness, our realization that I'm powerless and my life has become unmanageable. So this creates an emotional charge. I like to think of it as creating an existential crisis. It means that we are in trouble. We have no idea what we're going to do about it. We don't want to go back to the past because we know what that's about, but we don't have any sense of what's next for us. So we sit in this crisis. Well, that crisis really creates an incredible charge. And this is the brilliance of the steps. The charge that's created in the preceding step is resolved or discharged in the step that follows it. So step 2 resolves that existential crisis by giving us hope that we can be restored to sound thinking in our life. Well, now this creates another charge because hope without action is just fantasy. So we've got to be mobilized in some way. So while I'm hopeful, I want things to be different in my life, I know I need to do something to make them different. Because what we know is if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so now there's a new charge built up, but we'll get to that in a minute. There should be another slide here. Hold on. Oh, yes, this is it. That should go there. Sorry about that. So now step 3 resolves what that charge that was developed in step 2, because hope now becomes a reality because we start to take action. Step 3 is about making a commitment, right? Herb likes to describe it as making a decision, right? To discovering a new way of life. I like to think it of mobilizing ourselves towards this organic wisdom we have that keeps moving us towards more and more of what we can be. In psychology, we've called that self-actualization, that we have a tendency to become what we can be and to actualize whatever is possible at the time. So now that I'm mobilized towards self-actualization, it's creating a charge. What do I have to do to start actualizing myself? I've made a commitment to it. I've taken that step, which is an important step. Now there needs to be tangible evidence to my commitment. And that's what step 4 is about. It's resolving or discharging that energy by us doing an inventory. But now a new charge develops because we need connection. We need to be seen, not just to have a soliloquy with ourselves and to become aware of these things ourselves. That's important, but it's also important for us to be witnessed. And that moves us into step 5. But let me go into this a little bit. Making a commitment to a new way of life. And the effectiveness of the whole AA program will rest upon how earnestly have tried to come to a decision, right? A decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God, which to me translates into making a commitment to discovering a new way of life, a way of life that works under any conditions, whatever. And willingness is an important part of this, as we know. What's the program? Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. This step requires affirmative action. I've got an intent, right? But that intent has to be accompanied by appropriate or right action, or it doesn't create change. But this commitment has to be a total commitment to go to any lengths. What I say in one of my first books was the 12 Stupid Things That Mess Up Recovery. If you approach recovery with anything less than you pursued your addiction, it won't work. And I don't know what kind of an alcoholic or addict you were, but I'd go to any lengths to get drunk or to get high, any lengths. And the question is, are you willing to do that in your recovery? And are you willing to go to any lengths? If you are, then you're committed. So, we don't want to go here yet. We talked about that. Where did that? So here's a summary of these things. That was obviously out of order. So steps 3 are about waking up. Step 1, beginning to develop an honest relationship to reality. Very important component of emotional sobriety. There's the installation of hope that things can be different, but I'm going to need to get very much involved in my life in a very different way for those things to be different. That's where I'm making a decision to make a commitment to develop a new consciousness that's based on freedom, on emotional freedom, that's based on emotional autonomy. So that leads us to this next step, right? To step 4. But as you see, what's happening is the way Bill said it, and I'm going to phrase it in a little different way, but I thought it was worthwhile of looking at this quote, is that all of the 12 steps ask us to go against, I'm not so sure I'd call it our natural desires. I think they go against our false self. They all deflate our egos, or they shatter our reliance on our false self, is the way I want you to think about it. Every step is deconstructing our relationship with our false self and giving us an opportunity to really start to develop an honest relationship with ourselves, with our true selves. So what happens with this deconstruction is we realize that the way we've been living our life doesn't work. We become disillusioned. And as Dr. Horney says, that the value of this disillusioning process lies in the possibility that when we weaken the obstructive forces of the addiction and the false self, the constructive forces of the real self have a chance to grow. This is the magic of the program. This is what happens when you start to work the program. You start to let the constructive forces of your real self begin to be the determining force to your life, rather than all these other things that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. She goes on to say that the object of therapy, and we could say the object of recovery, is to restore the individual to himself. to restore the individual to himself. A curious idea, right? That we're not connected to ourselves. We're not. And it's going to become obvious as we talk about this today. To help that person regain his spontaneity and to find his center of gravity in himself. See, the more that we're free, the more spontaneous we can be. There's not so many rules that are governing our behavior. So we don't become self-conscious and feel like we've got to act a certain way to be okay. We're able to respond as we are in the moment. Having that center of gravity within yourself means that you've started to unhook that emotional dependency and your dependency on environmental support, that you're learning how to give yourself that support rather than depend on the environment. We say we move from a other validated self-esteem to a self-validated self-esteem. Now, what makes the true self so important that you've heard me talk about a lot? Well, Maslow really had some great observations about this. He's a psychologist and probably many people consider him the father of humanistic psychology, along with Carl Rogers. But one of the things he talked about, that if you lose your true self, it will breed an illness. So if you don't honor who you really are, you're going to get emotionally and spiritually ill, maybe even physically ill. If you have that true self, it will prevent illness. It becomes what we call a protective factor. And that's why I really would love to see some prevention be focused on helping people get in touch with and live according to who they really are. But here's the important thing about recovery. It's restoration. Restoring the true self to a person who's lost it cures their illness. And we know this to be true. But we need to maintain a fit spiritual condition, right? On a daily basis for that to remain true. And we'll talk about that when you stop doing the things you need to do to get well, it's like you're standing on an escalator that's going down. You're not going to just hold still. You're going to regress. So step 4, we arrived at step 4, right? We've laid this foundation with steps 1, 2, 3. We've kind of deconstructed our reliance on our false self. We've replaced it by a desire to now find this emotional sobriety, to discover it in our life. And so what the 3rd step says is, once we make a commitment, now go ahead and do something. Make this searching and fearless moral inventory of yourself. Well, let's look at that in some detail. So what is the therapeutic effect of 4? Well, it's increasing our self-awareness, increases our insight into ourselves, and increases our self-honesty. This is what Bill says about it. Now we launched out on a course of vigorous action. The first step, which is a personal, the vigorous action is the first step, which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us have never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless it once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. Vigorous action is what's involved in this step. Our decision was important in step 3, a vital one and a crucial step, but it's not going to have any permanent effect on our lives unless there's this effort, this strenuous effort, he calls it, to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. Now, it's interesting that a lot of us have approached step 4 from a lot of the models that have been out there. But one of the things that we've done recently in these workshops is suggested that you do step 4 with an awareness and an orientation towards your emotional dependency, and see what a difference that makes. I think it'll have a pretty powerful one, as you see as we go along today and talk about this. Working step 4 thoroughly is the first tangible evidence. Right now, we're really seeing, am I actually doing what I say I'm going to do to change my life? It's the first tangible evidence of our willingness and our commitment. Awareness is the first step in the process of change. We know that it's a prerequisite to change, and we need to search out our flaws in our makeup, which caused our failures. I'm pausing because if you have a thought or a reflection, you can write it down and send it to Susie. So Bill goes on to say in the 12 steps and 12 traditions that we want to find out how, when, and where our natural desires have warped us. Notice he didn't use the word why. How, when, and where. Our natural desires have warped us. Well, how come he didn't say, why have we become so warped? Because it's more important to become aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it than why. Why is too much of an intellectual game. But the what and how gets down to functioning. We want to look squarely at the unhappiness that this has caused others and ourselves. By discovering what our emotional deformities are, we can move towards their correction. Without a willing and persistent effort to do this, there can be little sobriety or contentment for us. As we're going to learn later on in steps 6 and 7, we're really developing the best possible attitude we can have towards living our life. And that's what this step is. He's teaching us this practice of self-examination and how important that is. So when we talk about fearless in the terms of this step, searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, it means not letting our self-hate or false pride keep us from being honest with ourselves. As soon as you start to feel that you're hating yourself, or that your false pride is kicking in and you want to start to justify your behavior, boy, that's time to get with someone and get some help. Because if you don't get some help in dealing with that self-hate or false pride, what you're going to produce in doing the step 4 is not going to be very helpful. You have to be rigorously honest with yourself. To the point where what you're seeing makes you uncomfortable. And that's not easy for those of us that always want to feel comfortable, right? So that's what we're changing. You see, what most of us have done, we've lived our lives by trying to be comfortable. I don't want to be uncomfortable. So we do only those things that make us comfortable, or we use things to make us comfortable. If we're anxious or upset, we get drunk or we get high, or we turn to food, or we turn to sex or shopping or whatever. But what we've done is that we've wanted to be comfortable, but everything about us is we've shut down, we've imploded. So that life, that zone of comfort in our life actually starts to shrink, and we're less and less comfortable in situations in our life. Well, recovery is the opposite. We have to be expansive. We have to go outward. We have to take risks. We have to try on things that we would never try on before. As we do that, the zone of comfort also expands as our consciousness does. And that's where serenity comes from. If in your life you have a lot of room to operate from in your life, then you're going to walk around being more or less serene and peaceful. And when you get knocked off balance, you'll have a way of getting back on balance. Okay. This is what Fritz said. He says, if we cannot understand ourselves, we can never hope to understand what we are doing. We can never hope to solve our problems. We can never learn to live rewarding lives. However, such understanding of ourselves involves more than the usual intellectual understanding, or what we call insight. It requires feelings and sensitivity too. So what are the areas that we want to look at as we're doing step 4? Well, we want to focus on these habits and patterns that have to do with ourselves, how we relate to ourselves, the way we treat ourselves, as Nathaniel Branden says, the reputation we have with ourselves. We want to look at the habits and patterns that go into our relationship with others. Those habits and patterns that show up in work. And whether or not we have found our purpose in our life. Are we living life from a purpose, or are we out there kind of lost? So let's use this as a kind of a model. So we all start life with that true self. You see that center piece. Usually I'll have a picture of an acorn with an oak tree behind it. And that everything that is in that acorn to become that beautiful oak tree that it eventually will mature into, have it given a chance to grow. Well, us, just like that acorn, we have a true self. It doesn't mean that you're going to become Picasso or someone like that, but your true self just means that you have the capacity to be a fully functioning human being. That's what each one of us has. And we see it. It's there in the child, right? A child just is completely spontaneous until they're not, until they start to, what we call introject a lot of these ideas about how the child is supposed to act, et cetera, et cetera. But then at some point in our beginnings of our development, around the age of 3 or 4 or 5, it could even be 2 years old, maybe even earlier, we start to become anxious that I am not going to be loved, I'm not going to be accepted, I'm not going to belong. And at that point in time, we move away from who we are and try to become the self that we think we need to be in order to be okay. Dr. Karen Horney called it the search for glory, because we tell ourselves that if I can be that person, then everyone's going to love me. I'm going to feel like I belong all the time. I'll always know what to do. I'll never feel uncomfortable. Well, there's also a dynamic that goes on. Now, you see that little green triangle, the spy self? Well, I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about alienation of self here in a minute. But the despised self is any part of us that shows up that does not have to do with that idealized self or the way that we should be. Because remember, the false self is run by the tyranny of shoulds. We have all these shoulds in our life. I should be this way, I should be that way, that are all based on this idea of who we have to be okay, to be loved. Well, when our behavior falls outside of that, as depicted by those green diamonds, we're going to hate ourselves. Because if I've got to be understanding all the time and one time I'm not, then I'm going to be ashamed that I'm not understanding, and we're going to implode. Or if I'm supposed to be thoughtful, I'm not, and that's on the outside of the behavior, then I'm going to be upset with myself that I'm not as thoughtful as I thought I should be, and I'm going to condemn myself and hate and despise myself for not being that way. Now, what step 4 requires us to do is to take a look at who we are and what we've become, and to take a searching and fearless moral inventory. For many of us, that's quite a challenge, Because in facing what we've done, we have to face the fact that we despise ourselves. And as we see more and more of that, it's going to turn into the self-hatred, where you're going to feel like you're a mistake, not just that you've made a mistake, but that you are one. The shame over not being what you think you should be can be crippling at times. And that's the stuff that we've got to let go of. Now, what do I mean by self-alienation? Well, if you take a look at this, you'll see it's pretty obvious. So self-alienation occurs very early on in life. When I first started to try to become someone I'm not, rather than being who I am, what happened at that point was I made certain things okay about my behavior, about who I am, and certain things not okay. The okay things had to do with I'm that way, I will be loved and accepted. If I'm not that way, I'm not going to be, and then I'm going to get anxious as something bad's going to happen. That's what it's going to feel like inside. So the forces that want me to be what I think I should be are so great because they're generated by holding off the anxiety. You see, when you stop anxiety, it's unbelievably powerful in terms of its determining factor, in terms of how much it reinforces a behavior. And so when you are a certain way and you think that that's the solution, that creates an unbelievably difficult habit and pattern of behavior to break. Well, what is self-alienation? Well, self-alienation is when we disconnect ourselves from who we really are and try to become that false self. And now I only identify with those things that I think I should be, and I don't identify with the rest of me. So I'm cut off from myself. I've alienated myself from who I am, from any awareness of all of who I am. Well, that creates, both of those things creates quite a challenge when we come to doing step 4, doesn't it? Because in step 4, I want to be honest with what's going on and how I should, and what's happening in my life, how I've been acting, what I've been doing. But if these forces are at play and I'm not aware of these things, I may have a lot of difficulty going in that direction of feeling that shame, feeling that powerlessness, feeling that pain. So let's see what else we got here. I think that's all I want to say. I just want to open it up to a discussion with everyone, and we'll get chat about it for a while. And then we'll talk about what to do specifically in a little while about how to become aware of these limitations. So let me stop sharing my screen.
Hi, Alan. The question I have for you, hello, is when some people I know are struggling with the step 4 with the AA way, which is the 4 columns, and then you're left with different words that feel quite negative. And it doesn't feel as in-depth or descriptive as what you're doing. It feels a bit like you're just getting a stick to beat yourself up with some more. How, yeah, I'm about to help someone with a step 4, and I want to find out really what's a really good way to explain this. I've asked them to look at your videos, but in that 4-column concept.
Yes. Well, I first of all, you really are, I think, addressing something that I've had a lot of concern about lately, is that, and this was unintentional, I'm sure, but that when we start to look at ourselves, we don't want to just put down one hand, club and pick up another club to beat ourselves with, even in the spirit of, or in the, in the spirit of recovery, right? I mean, come on, it's not about beating ourselves up. It's about now starting to act, on our behalf is what we're really trying to do. We're really trying to establish a new way of life. So I'm with you. Let's get rid of all of the words that would create shame. So instead of even calling these things character defects, one person in my Thursday workshop called them character defaults. I like that. I like to think of them as creative adjustments or creative adaptations that at one point made sense, but have outlived their purpose. So if we start to unravel them in that way, I think we take the shame out of it and see that they're all functional. Every one of these things, and that's what Bill is essentially saying in step 6, is every one of these things has a function in our life. We don't just develop them randomly. We develop them because they serve some kind of a purpose in our life, even though we may not have been aware of what that was. So that's the first thing. I'm very much with you on that. So then if we go through and we stay, let's look at my over dependence, let's say, on people and circumstances or on my environment for myself, for my sense of self, right? Then I think we start to get down to the causes and conditions that Bill is talking about, because he he referred to this as our quote basic flaw. Even that word I don't like, because it says that it's a flaw, and it's not. See, we have to be dependent. I mean, you start out being 100% dependent on your mother for everything in the womb, right? She has to provide you with everything. And then when you're born, you start to participate in your life by breathing for yourself. You're not hooked up to the umbilical cord anymore. Now you've got to provide the oxygen in your lungs and stuff like that by your breathing, by inhaling and exhaling. So our breath is our first act of really freedom, right? Of being able to support ourselves. But if there's no oxygen in the room, forget it. You're in trouble. I mean, we cannot survive without being in relationship to our environment in some way. It's just what we want to do here is to understand the most beneficial way that we can be in relationship to our environment in a way that helps me grow myself so that I can become what I can be. See, that's what this whole emotional sobriety business is about, is helping us grow along those lines. So that's the way I would take somebody into this, is to say, hey, let's look at what you had to do, how you creatively adjusted or how you creatively adapted at some point in your life. Let's look at how those adaptations have caused some trouble for you. And let's start to look at some new possibilities, because that's how I define recovery, is a discovery of new possibilities. Did I answer your question?
You did. I mean, I'm the same as you. I really struggle with shaming words. And when they start talking about defects, my heckles go up because my inner critic has been so prevalent for so many years. But I'm just quite nervous about taking guiding someone in the right direction of what this is about and what to do.
You've got a good internal barometer. Your hackles go up. Pay attention to those when you're guiding them. If those hackles go up, you're going in the wrong direction. Just use that as your compass. You have a good compass inside. Use it. For many years, I didn't use it. I just was, like I said, I thought that's how you got better, is beat yourself up. Now you just have to beat yourself up in the right way. Well, no, you got to stop beating yourself up. There's no right way to beat yourself up. I mean, there's time to call ourselves out and to say, hey, time to step up, but it's not by beating yourself up.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you.
Thanks, Liza. Okay, Jack, come on in.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Berger. Appreciate your time and your expertise. You said a couple of things, and I didn't catch the last word, but you said do step forward with an awareness towards your emotional. There was another word.
Emotional dependency. Your emotional
Dependency.
Yeah,
And
Bill called that our basic flaw, Jack. He said this is what caused us to be so reactive to everything, and then caused us then to turn to alcohol for a solution. Jack, you disappeared. Where did you go? You still there?
Yes, sir. Somebody took my hand down.
Oh, I didn't do it.
That's all right. I can.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jack. I'll just have faith that you're there.
Yeah, you said emotional dependency. I'm clueless on how to do step forward toward that focus. And then the other thing is just I have so much negative cognition and I don't know where that stems from. Nothing stands out like a PTSD moment where my childhood, somebody did something. My grandmother took me from my mother when I was 1, and I lived in fantasy and kind of raised myself and then went down the wrong roads. But I don't know where all that, I'm not good enough, I'm gonna fail, people are gonna find out that I'm a fake. And but I live by the principles, I'm a good man, I am smart. I can put it on paper, but I don't believe that stuff.
Yeah. Well, look, there may be a part of you that believes it, Jack, but there's another part of you that's pretty strong that doesn't. And so let's go back to what we said a minute ago, is that if we think about that as somehow of a creative adaptation or adjustment to the situation you were facing as a child. You were 1 year old when your aunt, was it your aunt or grandma that took you from your mom?
Grandmother.
And how come she took you?
I'm not sure the details. I heard that she tricked my mother. She got her diary. So I don't know. She was a drug addict, alcoholic, promiscuous. Maybe used that in court. I'm not sure. I'm grateful she did take me because it's probably the best thing. I don't know, but still,
But it would be easy to imagine, even as a child, that if you were different, then maybe your mother would have stepped up to love you. And see, we find this as oftentimes to be a part of trauma, is that we fantasize that there was something that I could have done to avoid the situation that I then confronted.
exactly.
So I think that's where this stuff comes from, is that there's a part of you that developed this critic in you that goes after you to try to get you to be, quote unquote, the perfect person, so your mother will come back. And then
Well,
take care of it.
I have that perfectionism character defect for sure.
I will bet you do, Jack. I will bet you do. Because see, that's the fantasy, that if I was just this way, then none of this would have happened.
Gotcha. Well, I sure appreciate that insight. That is so.
Well, don't appreciate it until you get my bill.
You want me to put my address in the chat?
Please don't do that. I would feel terrible.
Thank you, sir.
I just want to try to be funny today a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Alan. Hey, so I've got a question in the chat. Millie, hang on just a minute. I've been false self for so long. How do I know the true from the false?
Oh, good question. I love questions. You guys have had some great questions today. Well, you guys always do. The truth be said, truth be known. So the way that it works for me is when I'm operating from my authentic self, then I'm congruent. Then what I say and what I feel are in alignment. How I want to be is in alignment with how I am. When I am incongruent in my behavior is when my false self is operating. So use congruence as a measure. If you're incongruent, let's say, you're upset, but you say, no, everything's fine. Well, no, sorry. That's incongruent. So what we're really striving for is when I am who I am, then there will be this, then what I say and what I do are going to line up.
Awesome.
Does that answer that question, you think, Susie?
Yeah, I think it's a good one.
Okay.
And
Good.
if they want more, they can come to you and say, could you spell it out? Right?
Yeah, sounds good. I'll go with that.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Millie, come on in.
Came to you about 2.5 years ago. I came to this group, and it's been life-changing for me. And what I could never figure out, that only came to me in this talk today, is that emotional sobriety. And so you said earlier that we pick up our addiction because we're uncomfortable, right? And we don't think it's okay to be uncomfortable. I realized that emotional sobriety, and especially step 4, is the tool to feel comfortable with feeling uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Meaning that I'm totally okay with how I feel, be it good or bad. But step 4 gives me the opportunity to let go of the guilt, shame, and remorse, to be okay, to be comfortable with being uncomfortable about my life or a situation. So that's what came to my mind.
I think that that's right on. And I think the other thing that step 4 helps us do, though, is to take responsibility for those things that we have made mistakes about. See, we talk about the difference between healthy guilt and neurotic guilt, right? Healthy
Correct.
guilt that helps me take responsibility for the things I've done that are wrong or hurtful or harmful. Whereas neurotic guilt makes me take responsibility for things that I haven't done yet, or that I fantasize I've done when I haven't. So we've got to discern those things. And I think step 4 helps us with that discernment.
I just know that I always grab to anything, shopping, sex, food. My primary addiction is food. But I always grab to it as soon as I felt uncomfortable about something that I didn't want to feel. And I'm rereading your book again, The 12 Emotional Insights, and just reassuring that makes it just rereading it. It really makes it clear to me that it's totally okay to feel uncomfortable, and that this discomfort, like you said, can also be a lesson. It can also be an opportunity to learn. It can be an opportunity for growth, even if it's just a matter of accepting that. And that's the opportunity for growth.
You're answering the previous person's question too. How do I know if I'm operating? See, just because I'm uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's not authentic, because there's things that I'm going to do when I push the envelope in my life. I'm going to feel uncomfortable. But it's also that at those times when I'm pushing the envelope, there's also some excitement, right? That I'm discovering something new. So I really, really like what you're saying about that. This is about us embracing all of what we are. See, I like to define mental health as mental health is an appropriate balance and coordination of all of what we are. So every part of us is welcome. There's no part of us that's not. The problem becomes is when we let a part of us that is, let's say, was developed early on to serve some kind of a function, end up continuing to run our lives today. See, that becomes a problem, but you're on a good track with this. I really like it.
I have a question in the chat, okay? I thought I was incredibly willing to take action in step 4, but found myself re-traumatizing myself in certain areas and chose to step away and even find a new sponsor. I've had to practice accepting grace for myself in this process of starting again. How would you recommend becoming unblocked by the trauma I feel in laying out my past experiences? I work with a therapist as I have complex PTSD, a spiritual teacher, and a sponsor, but the fear of step 4 is paralyzing.
Wow. Well, before you jump into doing step 4, you got to confront the part of you that's scaring you. And the question would be, what is that part of you telling you that you're going to find out, that you're so scared of finding out? And that would be the first thing you need to do before you dig into it. See, what we say is that we have to be able to support ourselves to a certain degree to be able to really be fearless and thorough. And so how do we support ourselves in being fearless and thorough? Is by understanding that, whatever we're going to discover about ourselves does not define us. It's just a part of who we are. And there are other parts of us, like the part of us that's seeking, which is really more the part that we want to identify with. So it really comes down to an identification, doesn't it? If I identify with who I'm not, then it's going to be a real challenge. But if I identify with becoming what I can be, and that seeing this as part of the process, I think it allows me to endure some of that pain better.
Hi, my name is Pooja. It's actually midnight where I am. So glad to be starting my next day with this discussion. Okay, I have two questions, two very small ones. First one is a reference to what you said. If we don't transform, we transmit. And what happens when we do transform? So that's first question. And the second one is, yeah, I wanted to refer to one of your slides that had 4 points. I believe they were the needs that we all have. And there was a picture of a lady on the side. And
Yes.
one of the points, and one of the points was work. And the fourth one was the purpose of life. And I was wondering, is it a given that they have to be separate? Yeah. So what's your
No, it's not a given. It's just we're dividing those things in is to try to identify patterns that might run across all of them. So what we're looking for, remember, habits and patterns that are controlling our life. So that's why she suggested those demarcations, those 4 categories. I think they're pretty good because I think they cover all aspects of our life. But you're right, there's going to be a lot of overlap. Now, the first question I didn't totally understand. Could you say the first one again?
Okay, first question was, you mentioned that without transformation, there is transmission. What happens when there is a transformation? What does that lead to? Is that
when we start to let's say when we start to transform these things, then we also now start to create a positive kind of energy in our life that other people pick up and respond to and meet us with. And so now, it's like before, our illness takes us to the lowest common denominator. Once we start to function better, we move to the highest plane that we can be at that particular point in self, or operate from the highest self, which invites other people to operate. See, people tend to respond in kind, don't they? If I'm a jerk, there's a good chance you're going to be a jerk right back at me. But if, I take the high road, there's a good chance we're going to meet in a different way.
Yeah, there won't be a retaliation for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So do you mean that the positivity is what gets transmitted?
That's another way you could say it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Pooja. Kyle, come on in.
There. Thank you for this presentation. It was very helpful. I'm currently going through the steps myself. I am on step 4. So this I love this. I took a lot of it. My question is, some of the questions I'm going through, I'm not sure if I should reflect back on my previous self or my future desired state of where I'm aspiring to be and trying to get to.
That's a good question. Give me an example, Kyle.
Oh, I knew it. I don't have one off the top of my head, but like how I approach certain situations. And that's the best I can do. Like, should I answer it with how I had been in the past?
Yeah, how you have been in the past and where you'd like to go.
So do both?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then when I look at it, is that in the past, make sure that the projection you have for where you want to go is based on reality, right? Don't set yourself up. What we say is don't take this dirty shoe off one foot and put it on the other, right? So be aware of things like trying to be perfectionistic, right? In who you want to be in the future. And that's why this is always good to bounce off someone who's what we call an enlightened witness. We'll talk about more of that in step 5, but the enlightened witness is someone who could say, hey, you know what? That's not going to work, Kyle. Let's try something else.
Okay, I have a question in the chat. What are the first simple actions to kick off step 4? I struggle with it and can't even start it. Thank you. What are the first simple actions?
Well, I don't know if I think it's probably in the archive somewhere, but we talked about using an emotional sobriety inventory to do a step 4. So if you wanted to, you could try that as your first shot at it. Herb also has some great questions to answer in terms of doing an inventory. So I'd also suggest those. But the emotional sobriety inventory, just as these columns, is write down a situation that upset you a lot, and then how you responded to that situation. And then after you do those first 2 columns, then in the 3rd column, you're going to try to identify what was my expectation. What didn't happen that I thought should happen for me to be okay? And that'll help you identify what we call your expectation and your unenforceable rule. Well, once you discover that, then it's pretty easy to back into what we call your unhealthy dependency. Because usually you'll say, like, let's say, well, I wanted, let's say, Joe to recognize myself at work, or recognize what I did at work, recognize an achievement I did at work. He didn't recognize me in a proper way. Then the unhealthy dependency would be, I need other people to recognize what I'm doing, instead of being able to recognize and give myself that pat on the back. I'm dependent on them. So then that becomes the unhealthy dependence. I look for others to recognize me instead of recognizing myself. And then that leads us to a solution. All right, well, what would it mean to recognize yourself? What's blocking you from doing that? And then we can start to do some work. So that's what I would suggest.
So where is the best place to go first?
Anything that's upsetting you.
Okay.
Anything, current or in the past. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's going to lead you to the same place.
Thanks. I don't want to do that. No, I do. Okay, Esme, I'm going to get your name so totally wrong. But come on in, Esme. I know that's not
Hi,
right.
everyone.
Hi.
That's okay. My name is Asma. Thank you, Alan, for your time. I heard some of your videos on YouTube talking about emotional dependency, and I've struggled with that a lot. And it starts showing more when I start working the program. For example, the dependency on my sponsors. The last one, I wasn't aware, and that's the problem, that I was dependent on her. In some points, I was just doing what she wants me to do, of the fear that she will leave, because she was really honest, brutally honest with me. So one day she decided to leave, and the thing that I was afraid of happened, of course, and I was really broken, and I was in panic and anxiety. Why did that happen? Why she did? And so I dealt with this couple times. I find myself always trying to depend on others, and every time she compliments me with something, I feel super happy. For example, I also noticed this pattern with my new sponsor. I shared with her something on a workshop, and she's like, you know what, it would be better if you stick to the big book and the worksheets. And I noticed that I was telling myself, yeah, she's right. I shouldn't be open to do a lot of workshops and watch other speakers, but I love that. But I find myself blaming myself because I want to be more curious. And my question is that I'm so fed up with this pattern. What can I do to I'm aware of it, but I find myself repeating it over and over.
Well, the way I like to think about approaching these things is what I do with my clients is I have them separate themselves from the various parts of themselves. You guys will probably recognize that as the current, fad in psychotherapy is the internal family systems. But before it was internal family systems, it was Gestalt therapy that talked about these things. So what we do is we say that if mental health is an appropriate balance and coordination of all of what we are, you have to find out what part of you feels like you have to have that validation to be okay. So you got to identify the part of yourself that is dependent like that, and then have a nice talk with her and start to learn how to deal with her and see if you can give her what she's looking for from other people. Because it does mean to me that if you are doing that, it means that you're not recognizing yourself enough, that you're not supporting yourself enough. Now, maybe there's reasons, cultural reasons why if you do that, you're not modest or whatever it is. But there's a lot of things that, you know, we come to our what we call our rotten behavior legitimately. But the big thing is to see what you can do to give yourself that which you're looking for from other people. Have a relationship with that part of you that's looking to other people that starts to turn that around.
Okay, thank
Does that
you.
make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
You can do
Thank
that.
you.
You can do it by putting a chair across from you or doing some writing dialogue with those different parts of yourself. There's a lot of different ways to do it.
Okay, Margie, I'm just saying hi.
I'm
That's all.
curious. I'm curious. I feel inspired. Thank you. I do have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. So my hope, kind of desperate hope, is that if I'm able to take care of all my Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they're in place, and I am spiritually fit, I'm in conscious contact through a continuous inventory, and these days an emotional sobriety inventory. I'm just hoping that I will evolve into my authentic self so that I can just go about life doing and being rather than scared.
Well, see, I think Marky, I'm not so sure how to pronounce your first name, but the way I would say it is that if you are meeting all those needs, you are in your authentic self. See, you wouldn't be able to do that without being there, right? So if you are paying attention to those things, it means you're well on the way of being who you want to be. And you're right, you know, that you know, Maslow talked about the different kind of motivation, but what he called about these being values that you're talking about are based on who we are, right? And being able to be connected to that. And so that's the big difference between doing and being, right? Those kinds of things is the difference. And you captured it. I think that's right on. So once again, I go back to pay attention to where you're incongruent. You know, if you're incongruent in somewhere, that means you got some work to do to get yourself aligned.
Okay, Despina, come on in.
Hi, Dr. Berger. Some last year I had brought I brought to you about the situation with my father, that I hadn't seen him in a long time, was very uncomfortable about it. And you said, just call him, right? So I finally did. I worked up the courage to do it, ended up going on a cruise with him.
Yeah.
Turned out to be a horrendous situation. I almost feel masochistic dealing with him. The feelings of invisibility were so pronounced. Just it was painful. And I'm at it. So once the cruise was over, I haven't spoken to him since. And so it was brought up to me, radical acceptance that he just is unable to change. His wife of 56 years had died. He's grieving her, and that's it. And she was the polar opposite of me. And I can't seem to be, I find that with older men, I turn them into daddy figures. And to be able to shift that, extremely painful. And I'm not, you know, I mean, daddy figures are almost my age. So it's ridiculous, but.
Well, look, you're answering your own question, but you may not be aware of it. See, the issue wasn't what he did with you on the cruise. It was what you did. You made yourself invisible. And you just said how you did it, is that something happens where you lose yourself with him. And see, the issue is there's an opportunity there to unpack those situations where you could learn an awful lot about this habit and pattern of behavior that you have about making yourself invisible. And it would really be quite helpful for you, Despina, to do that, because you got everything you needed to get out of that trip. Like we said, you don't have to travel to India to find your guru. They're right in the living room.
Right. And it's just, we don't have to deal with our parents if it's just such a dysfunctional situation. It is almost masochism.
No, it wouldn't happen if you didn't and make yourself invisible. You'd be immune to what he's doing. But you see, when he makes you invisible and you make yourself invisible, then you get hurt.
Thanks, Despina. Okay, Robin, come on in.
Hi, hi, I'm Tessa. Thank you, Dr. Berger. I'm phoning from South Africa, and I think I don't know if mine's a question or a comment, but just a lot of what people have said have resonated. One is that I like to call my character defects more my defense mechanisms. So they are things that I did when I felt the need to defend myself because I wasn't strong enough inside. And as I get stronger inside, I will need those defense mechanisms less and less, because I'll need to defend myself less and less, because I won't care so much what everyone else thinks, and I won't feel so unsafe because I will be providing my own safety. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it now, is that I need to strengthen from the inside. But I think a lot of things are so unconscious that and even doing the step 4 doesn't seem to make me conscious about it, because I'm very authentic in that I feel pissed off, I act pissed off, I say that I'm pissed off. So I'm very congruent, but I find it very hard sometimes to see my part in it, because I'm acting out of a sense of, like, it was of such injustice, like I seem to be operating from that sense of injustice so often. And it seems to me that it's like I'm expecting people to be fair. And I'm just wondering what that is, because that seems to be such a common thread. And then I don't even want to do any more step 4s, because it just pisses me off on it just makes me more pissed off, if you know what I mean, going through doing my step 4. So, but, having said that, like my mother used to piss me off, but now that she's old and she got sick, I've got so much compassion for her that she's no longer frightens me. She's no longer, I just go, it's okay, Mom, it's okay, don't worry. Like when she gets controlling, well, Mom, please don't tell me to do that. I know what I'm doing. But before I would be, so I'm wondering if some of that anger is fear related. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you said a lot of good things. So many things came to mind when you were sharing. I like how you described that as you get more and more grounded, you become less defensive or needing defense mechanisms. But I was going to ask you this: what does it mean? What does it mean for things to be fair or just for you?
Oh, things like people should be honest. It's all these shoulds. People should say what they mean and mean what they say. Otherwise, don't say it. Don't make promises you can't keep.
And if people did, what does that mean to you? So if people did that, what would that mean to you?
I always think that they do it to me and they wouldn't do it to other people. So it means that in some way I'm inferior to others. And I feel like I have to stand up.
If they do it positive, if they are what they say they are, if they are fair and just, what would that mean for you?
That I can trust them.
And if you can trust somebody, what would that mean?
That I can relax.
If you can relax, what would that mean?
I wouldn't need to, be fearful or vigilant, or I could just, have fun and
Right.
Yeah.
So see, what you're saying is that you're feeling free, is the way I'd call it.
Yeah.
Is dependent on feeling safe.
Yeah.
Feeling safe is dependent on what they're doing. But see, I think you might be able to still be safe when you realize that with this person, I can't expect honesty, or I can't expect justice or fairness. And then you could be free to have whatever kind of relationship you choose to have with them.
Yeah, I just have to measure myself, which I don't like to do. I like to just be myself. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm very open. And then if you're too open, people like that are like that, they can twist it and hurt you.
But see, then that's making a choice. It's too compulsive then, you follow me? Meaning that you're not being open because you see in that situation it's safe to be open. You're being open because you just want to be open. But what I'm saying is that when you let go of this idea that you have to have that to relax, you can still relax when you see that, it's not possible for me to be this way with this person. I'll just accept it as it is. Then it's okay. You won't be open with them, but you'll have whatever kind of relationship you'll have. It won't be black and white.
Mm. Okay, I'll think about that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks. There you go.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I made it. Dr. Berger.
Yes, sir.
I'm calling in from Cape Town. Thank you so much. You said one thing. You said recovery is not drinking or using, when it would make so much more sense to drink or use.
Yeah.
And that resonated with me, because that's basically what recovery is. And then your one slide here, which talks about the despised self.
Yes.
And right in the middle, you've got your true self. And then you've got the tyranny of shoulds.
Yes.
I should be doing this, and I should be doing that.
I like how you said it, the tyranny of should. That would be like a great movie.
Oh God. And don't worry, listen, I'm not cured. I'm not cured, believe me. But the tyranny of shoulds. Thank you so much for your talk. I really have enjoyed it.
Thanks, Alan.
Bye.
Thank you.